a warning, he performs naked, so his uniform's coming off. Da, 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 do, do. So Stubby is named after a World War I hero dog of the Yankee Division. Yeah. And the dog, if you read the story of Sergeant Stubby, saved his own life because he was smuggled on board a troop ship, and there were supposed to be no pets or mascots allowed under penalty of death for the animal. But when he was found by the commander of the 102nd Infantry Regiment, he salute, high five, salute. Come on, you can do it. Salute, all the way. Come on, salute. There you go. He saluted him, and the general let him stay. So he can sit pretty. He's very pretty. Want to say hello to everybody? How about a peekaboo? Peekaboo. There he does. He can, you ready? Weave. 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 I see. Good boy. Can you do a figure eight? Figure eight. Figure eight. No, figure eight. Come on. Figure eight. There you go. And he can give a paw. Thank you. He can give another paw. Other paw. Thank you. He can do a high five. He can do a low five. Nope. Low five. Thank you. He can do a double high five. Thank you. He can kick. Kick. Thank you. Tell me, take my arm. Tell me a secret. Ann is trying to kidnap you later on this evening. Yes. Your plan has been foiled. What else do you do? He can spin. He can spin the other way. He can take a bow. Good boy. He can, this floor is kind of slippery. I'd have him roll over, but I don't know if he can get purchase on it. And we'll end with his big finale, which is bang. Bang. I didn't miss. Now, you know he's dead because he's dead. Alive again. Now you can listen to what's humans. All right, Ian, you're up.
Okay. That dog is almost as cute as my dog. I'm dog sitting for my daughter. So I have a beagle mutt for a couple weeks. And so I rival him on Facebook all the time. I put my cute pictures up. He puts his cute pictures up. But anyway, this is our last program of the season. And I grabbed the wrong notes out of my pocketbook, so I'm going to ad-lib it. So I wanted to thank everybody that's been here through the season. And I wanted to thank our crew, Greg and Craig. And I wanted to thank our admission crew, Diane and Diane. And I wanted to thank our reception crew, which is Helen Farrer and Jude Martin, and all the people that have contributed, Mary Jo Rubin, Alex Frazee, Susan Swager, Barbara Erickson, Grace Galvin, Gail Alexander, Priscilla and Jean, Rita Horan, and Vincent Miles, who had that yummy English thing. So I'm busy at work for next year, and I welcome any ideas from other people, and I've gotten quite a few. And I hope we see you all next year. I want to thank, tonight's sponsors, Karen Ronaldo and Kevin Doyle, that are babysitting. Thank you. And without further ado, I want to thank Joe for coming. Joe, as he said, was the co-founder of the Cape Cod Military Museum, and he is also the owner and chief bottle, cook and bottle guy at Dog Man Dog Training. So tonight he's going to talk about the bizarre and eerie events in war, and it's all based on true events. So, take it.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
All right, I don't know if this will interfere with the other one, but, okay. If you haven't visited the Cape Cod Military Museum, it's because you can't. We do not have a building. We have a display up at the Falmouth Historical Museum on the Green till May on Falmouth, and it ties to D-Day. We had a display at the Bourne Historical Society for 4 months. We're going to be helping the Cape Cod Maritime Museum with their World War II display next year. We're helping the Marconi, Chatham Marconi site with their World War II display next year. In fact, I'm going to be doing a lecture 7 p.m. at the Marconi site this Thursday on Cape Cod Ties to D-Day. There is a brochure with our menu list of the lectures that I do on that table. There's an email sign-up sheet so you know what we're doing. We're very active in the community. I do several lectures. We did a big ceremony and lecture for the 80th anniversary of D-Day at the Wacourt Yacht Center in June 6th, which was really nice because it actually had been commandeered by the Engineer Amphibian Command and was used in World War II. We're working on something to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Bulge, which is this winter. We're going to trying to do something with the Marine Corps for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima. So again, we're very active in the community. So sign up for the email newsletter so you know what we're doing. Take a menu if you have an organization that needs a speaker. I'll talk anywhere, anytime. All right, so tonight's lecture, all these stories are true as far as I could ascertain. There are no hoaxes, no fabrications. The U.S. was looking for an efficient way of damaging Japanese cities in an effort to shorten World War II. A Pennsylvania dentist and friend of the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt came up with a novel solution, a bat bomb. Lyle S. Adams, yes, he was part of the Adams family, figured out that since most Japanese buildings were constructed of wood, paper, and bamboo, they would burn easily. His stroke of genius was observing that bats hide in inaccessible spaces during daylight. He theorized that bats with small bombs attached, released at night, would climb into the eaves, and if all those bombs went off at the same time, at daybreak, it would start multiple fires at once. His idea was codenamed Project X-Ray and tested at an air base in Carlsbad, New Mexico. The tests were run by Dr. Louis Frazier, inventor of napalm. Successful tests were conducted with Mexican free-tailed bats carrying dummy bombs. Dr. Frazier attached live 6-ounce explosives to bats for a demonstration in front of cameras. There was, however, an accidental release of the bat bombs. They flew towards the wooden barracks and the control tower, setting them ablaze. The resulting fire destroyed much of the base. So there was a successful bat bombing. It just happened to be ourselves on ourselves. According to the chief chemist, a bat bomb would be very effective weapons. Conventional, that's the carrier you drop that would open up on the way down. Conventional incendiary bombs would cause about 167 to 400 fires on a raid. A cast of bat bombs would cause 3,500 to 4,500 fires. Project X-Ray was canceled by Admiral King because of its slow development and the progress of the atomic bomb. On March 11, 1942, the U-boat 158 torpedoed the freighter Caribsea 14 miles off Cape Lookout Light, North Carolina. The seas were stormy and the ship was loaded with magnesium ore. It sank by the bow in less than 3 minutes. No lifeboats were launched, no distress signals sent. 7 of the crew of 28 were able to climb on life rafts that floated free of the wreck. One of the men that was drowned was Jim Gaskill, a native of the Outer Banks. The day after the sinking, Bill Gaskill, a fisherman and father of Jim, went down to the pier to look and check on his fishing boat. He was worried that flotsam from the storm would damage the boats and piers. He noticed a large planking banging against the pier. He grabbed his boat hook and pushed it away. As soon as the board was pushed out of reach of the boat hook, it instantly returned and beat against the pier. Again, Bill Gaskill pushed the boat away. Inexplicably, as soon as he lifted the boat hook off the plank, as if propelled by an unseen force, it was soon smashing against the pier. Finally, Gaskill used the hook end to pull the plank up to where he could reach for it. He pulled it out of the water. In pulling the board out of the water, it was turned over. To his horrified eyes, the gold letters that glittered in the sunlight spelled out the name Caribou, the name of his son's ship. He knew his son was dead and his ship sunk before it was even reported missing. On January 26, 1945, British and Indian troops landed on Ramri Island off the coast of southern Burma. Their mission was to clear the island of Japanese so a new airdrome could be constructed. The island's occupation force was a large undersupplied Japanese garrison. The fighting was brutal and few prisoners were taken. The Allies had air support for resupply and to attack the enemy. The Japanese were decimated, only a few thousand were left in a pocket hemmed in by the Allies and a mangrove swamp. The British offered them the option of surrender, which was against the Bushido Code. On the night of February 19th, roughly 1,000 of the sick, weak, starving troops tried to escape through the swamp. The exhausted Japanese trudged very slowly through the deep mud, tangled with roots and waist-deep water. British troops followed the sounds of the Japanese calm in motor launches. That night was the most horrible night any member of the motor launch crew ever experienced, wrote Bruce Stanley Wright, a soldier and naturalist. There were scattered shots in the night, high-pitched shrieks of men dying in terrible pain. What the Japanese did not understand was the mangrove swamp was home to one of the most vicious man-eaters on the planet, the saltwater crocodile. These reptiles can grow up to 23 feet in length and weigh over a ton. They have one of the highest bite forces of any animal on Earth. And if that's not enough, they have excellent night vision. The boat crews heard splash of the water, terrible snap of the crocs, the screams of the men crushed in the huge jaws, and even the whirling sound the crocodiles made performing their famous death roll. Only 20 Japanese survived the swamp. This is listed as the largest crocodile attack in recorded history. In 1914, Nova Scotia native Will Bird tried to join the Canadian Army to fight in World War I. He was rejected because his younger brother Steve, who was already serving the Army, requested that Will not serve. In one of his letters to Will, Steve wrote that if he did not come back from the war, maybe I'll find a way to come sometime and whisper in your ear. In 1915, Will had a vision of his brother Steve in uniform. Shortly after the vision, he received a telegram informing of Steve's death. Will enlisted on April 6, 1916, at age 24. Will began his service as a sniper with the 193rd Battalion of the Black Watch. After killing 3 Germans in quick succession, in one day, a queer sensation came over him and made him draw back. Bird told his sergeant that he had his fill of butcher's work. Bird served as a regular soldier in several campaigns, Amiens, Cambrai, and the bloody Battle of Passchendaele. That's over 4,000 Canadians killed. In 1917, Will and a few of his fellow soldiers spent a long night digging trenches and stringing barbed wire near the front lines of a ridge in Vilmy, France. It was just past midnight when Jim and Bob decided to call it a night and crawled into bivouac, or bivvy, as the Tommies called the holes in the sides of the trenches. The ground sheet that he was on broke free and brushed against his face. This woke Will up. Then when someone grabbed his hands, the visitor's hands were warm. Now fully awake, Will got a good look at his visitor. It was his brother Steve. Will recognized Steve's crooked smile. Steve told him to gather his gear and follow him. Will was too stunned to speak. There must have been a poison gas attack in this. They spent the went past the other makeshift shelters of Will's platoon mates. Some of Will's gear slipped off his shoulder. After picking his gear up, he could no longer see his brother. He searched high and low in the labyrinth of trenches. Finally, sweaty and exhausted, he fell asleep leaning against a wall. Early in the morning, he was awoken by one of his platoon mates, shaking him. He asked him, "What are you doing here?" "They're digging the bivvy you were in. All they've found so far is Jim's helmet and Bob's legs." A large German caliber round had landed a direct hit on the bivvy where he was supposed to be sleeping. He told his amazing story to other members of his platoon. Half the men seemed to think, sure, we're living in a site of a mass murder. The other half thought he was pulling their leg or just had a dream. He then remembered what his brother had written him. He realized that indeed, his brother Steve had found a way. Will Bird swore his story was true, but he's relatively unknown, though he did author several books, some fiction, some nonfiction. So I don't know if you'll believe him, his ghost story. Would you believe a queen that saw a ghost? Queen Williama of the Netherlands visited FDR at the White House on the 6th of August, 1942. Roosevelt, who was of Dutch descent, was delighted to greet the monarch who had just barely escaped the Nazis when they invaded her country 2 years prior. The Queen stayed in the Rose Room at the White House. The following night, President Roosevelt had held a cocktail reception for her. It was at that reception the Queen reported to the shocked President Roosevelt that she was not feeling well because she had fainted the night before. Roosevelt asked the Queen what had happened, and she replied, "Someone knocked on my door in the middle of the night. I got up and opened it. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but I saw Abraham Lincoln standing there, and then everything went black. I came to on the floor." She said that Lincoln was wearing a frock coat and his top hat, and he was standing directly in front of her. There's a story that Winston Churchill encountered a ghost upon exiting a bath. The nude Churchill supposedly said, "Mr. President, you have me at a disadvantage." The apparition smiled and faded away, but this story seems to be a myth to enhance Winston's wit. Maybe you wouldn't believe a queen, but how about a king? Or at least a future king. In 1881, future King George V was a midshipman on the HMS Bucante near Australia. A ghostly vessel, that's the Bucante, known by many as the Flying Dutchman, was sighted by the crew in the crow's nest. George saw the ship as well and had it entered in the Bucante's log, where the entry can be viewed to this day. What about a true story where the person telling the story is the ghost? In May 2000, 2-year-old James Linginger started to have vivid nightmares. He would wake up screaming, "Plane on fire, little man can't get out." It got so bad he was having the same nightmare 5 days a week. His parents were perplexed. One day at a toy store, his mother pointed to a model plane and said, "Look, there are bombs on this bottom of this plane." The toddler sighed. and said, "Mommy, those aren't bombs, they're drop tanks." Those are extra gasoline containers on the bottom of planes, as you can see there. As the nightmares continued, one night she asked James, "Who is the little man?" "Me," came the answer. His dad, who was now in the bedroom, said, "What happened to your plane?" "It got shot," James replied. "Who shot the plane?" asked Dad. With a disgusted face, he said, "The Japanese." "What type of plane did the little man fly?" "A Corsair," came the answer without hesitation. "They used to get flat tires all the time and wanted to turn to the left when you took off." "Dad, do you remember where you took off from?" "The Natoma," said little James. Bruce had never heard the word Natoma before, but did research. And by research, he went to the library, because this is pre-Google, and found there was indeed an escort aircraft carrier named Natoma Bay that served in the Pacific. The little boy even named his best friend, fellow pilot named Jack Larson. Bruce decided to find Jack Larson and prove or disprove his son's story. Jack Larson was eventually found and said his best friend was James Houston. He was killed when his plane got shot down in a fire crash off of Iwo Jima. Little James unnerved his father even more by telling him, "I knew you would be a good daddy, that's why I picked you." "Where did you find us?" the stunned father asked. "In Hawaii at the Pink Hotel on the beach." This description exactly matched the location where Bruce and Andrea had celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary shortly before James was conceived. Another veteran, John Richardson, reached out to Bruce to tell him he had seen James Houston's plane get hit in the nose by Japanese anti-aircraft fire and crash burning into the sea near a large rock in the bay. This account may explain why little James always knocked the propellers off his toy airplanes. They eventually met with James Houston's sister. She had a special connection with little James and said he looked exactly like her brother did as a child. The Linger family made a pilgrimage to the bay where they believe Houston's plane went into the sea. They tossed a wreath of flowers on the spot. James continued to have nightmares, but they waned in intensity until they stopped by age 8. James Linginger's story is amazing, but seems so far away. What if the reincarnation happened here on Cape Cod? Well, that's exactly what happened in Sharon Sanders' book, Final Mission. The story begins when Sharon started dating Rob Sanders. Rob was named for his uncle, Robert Sanders of Brewster, killed 15 years before his birth when his B-24 was shot down. His grandmother was so hurt by losing her oldest child on his last combat mission, his name and fate was kept a family secret. Rob didn't even know where his uncle was buried. Sharon and Bob go on a guided spiritual quest to give Robert the closure he wanted. He had written his mother and said he wanted to be buried back in Brewster, but she couldn't handle it and he was buried overseas. During their journey, their spiritual journey, they found that the Rob is actually Robert reincarnated. They went to a reunion of his unit for the 50th anniversary, and they did not have to introduce Rob. All the old men knew exactly who he was. If you look at the picture, that's pretty darn close, don't you think? It was a great story. It was a whole special section, the Cape Cod Times. They sent a reporter over with them when they went to visit his grave, and they had a ceremony for Rob over there, and I think that gave his spirit some closure. I have the copy of the book on the table. There's a table up front with all kinds of photographs and stuff for today's lecture. A number of years ago, a family came into the Katuitt Historical Society building complaining about a ghostly presence disturbing them in their home. A number of psychics were consulted. Some said it was an evil spirit. Some said it was benign. One of the spirits appeared to be a woman in a wedding dress. The other wore motorcycle boots and a short jacket. Herein lies the problem. The house was new construction. There was never a house there before. So not only did a bride not die there, a motorcycle rider didn't die there. What's going on? Well, one psychic came away with this impression. A young woman was in love with a Cape Cod commando, the nickname of the amphibious engineers that train or can do at Katuitt. He went out on a training exercise and never returned. The homeowner had misidentified the commando as a biker because of the short Ike jacket and jump boots that the Cape Cod commandos used to wear. So why is this woman spiritual in a house that was built long after Camp Dewitt was torn down by German POWs? There were 7,000 Engineer Special Brigade troops housed in tents all over Point Isabella. In my lecture on Washburn at war, several older women reported that they or their older sisters snuck onto the Washburn and had tryst in tents with the men on the island. It's not hard to believe that the ghost couple did the same thing. They were planning to marry, or maybe she surprised him by entering a tent in her wedding gown. Maybe she went to his tent after his death in her wedding gown. And her emotional breakdown in that tent trapped her psychic energy there. And the house unknowingly was built upon the site of this tragedy. Owen John Baggett was graduate of the Hardin Simmons University in 1941. He was employed as a defense contractor on Wall Street. All that changed on December 7th, 1941. December 11th, Owen enlisted in the Army Air Force. Upon his graduation from flight school, Baggett was posted to Pandavasawar, India. He was a co-pilot on a B-24 Liberator. His unit had assignments all over Burma, China, India Theater, CBI, on a mission to destroy a railroad bridge in the Pamanyaya, Burma, on March 31st, 1943. His squadron was jumped by 13 Ki-43s, or Oscars to Allied pilots. His B-24 was fatally hit and was on fire. The turret gunner was fighting the fire with an extinguisher, so Owen left his co-pilot seat and took over the gun position to buy more time for the other crew members to bail out. Finally, he and the pilot bailed out of their aircraft. Their travails were not over. The Japanese airplanes started strafing the helpless men in their parachutes. Owen saw two of his comrades shot to pieces and took a bullet in his left arm. He decided to play dead to avoid more strafing. A Japanese pilot approached slowly with his nose of his fighter high, almost at stall speed. The pilot actually opened his canopy to get a better look at Owen. Baggett had not been idle. He had drawn his M1911 Colt .45 pistol. Owen quickly fired 4 rounds. The plane spun down out of sight. Owen landed behind enemy lines. He was able to locate 2 of his crewmates. Their luck ran out when they were captured by the Burmese, who turned them over to the Japanese. Baggett was sent to a prison camp to be interrogated. Later in the same camp, he met Colonel Harry Melton. Melton had learned from an interrogator that a Japanese colonel, that a Ki-43 had indeed crashed and the pilot's body had been thrown clear of the wreckage. The pilot had a small caliber bullet wound in his head. Colonel Melton wanted to make an official statement on the incident, but died when his unmarked Hell ship was being transported and was sunk by a U.S. submarine. The real horror story of this the real horror of this story is the 176-pound Owen Baggett weighed 88 pounds when he was freed from the hospitality of the Japanese. Did you know there were werewolves in World War II? In fact, they killed 3,000 people in Germany from 44 to 47. Not the supernatural beasts, but die-hard members of the Hitler Youth. There were actually two types of werewolves. In the autumn of 1943, Heinrich Himmler instructed Hans Adolf Prinzen to form a military unit of commandos to operate behind enemy lines. Approximately 5,000 Hitler Youth and SS volunteers were trained in guerrilla tactics. They were ill-led and ill-supplied and largely ineffective. Otto Skorzeny realized that they would be a poor fighting force. So he converted the werewolves to an underground railroad to smuggle Nazis out of Germany. The men did build hideouts in which to operate behind enemy lines, but most surrendered. Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, had his own werewolves. He knew a good idea when he heard it. In 1945, he gave the werewolf speech in which he urged Germans to fight to the death. He created a propaganda program called Radio Werewolf, which featured howling and a catchy song. Reporters heard the broadcast and helped sow suspicion about the German people among Allied forces. The German people were exhausted from war and had little interest in a resistance movement. There were indoctrinated men inspired by Goebbels' propaganda that retreated to the woods and became desperados. Werewolf attacks were centered on German collaborators. The most famous act was the assassination of American-installed mayor in Aachen, Franz Oppendorf, in March 1945. They did millions of dollars worth of damage to property and killed thousands of Germans, but they did not kill one GI, and that's why most Americans have never heard of them. How about real wolves? By the winter of 1917, World War I had been going on for 3 years. Russian and German scouting parties were involved in intense skirmish, what was now Belarus. When all of a sudden, hundreds of wolves came out of the forest and started attacking the wounded soldiers. The troops instinctively turned their fire on the marauding canines. Hundreds and hundreds of wolves were attacking. After the killing of the wolves, they stopped fighting with each other and brought their wounded back to their own lines. Newspaper stories of the time reported that there was a temporary truce so both sides could concentrate on the plague of wolf attacks. There are no sources noted in news stories and only mentions it from Berlin and no Russian sources. So did it happen? I think it very well could have. In a wolf pack, only the alpha male-female usually breed, so there's only 1 litter of cubs per pack. With the war raging for years, driving away the wolves' natural prey, but leaving behind thousands of dead horses and men, the wolves' natural birth control measures were probably nullified, and every wolf couple could now breed. The abundance of horse and human food meant that there would be very large litters. A different example of wolf behavior, the wolves originally reintroduced to Yellowstone were terrified of buffalo. They had not seen them in Canada. It was not until they ate the remains of bison who died of natural causes that they were brave enough to start hunting them. Eating dead men might lessen the natural fear of men, but Russian medical practices could have affected it even more. Horse-drawn wagons were used as ambulances. If a wounded soldier did not appear to be able to survive the journey to the hospital or died, he was put on the side of the road to lighten the wagon and help speed the travel time for the remaining wounded. Wolves would then be conditioned to kill and eat near helpless men. The fact there were no Russian sources for this story in 1917 is not surprising, as they soon were in the chaos of the Russian Revolution. There is a reference in a Russian nurse's memoir of riding on an ambulance at night when a wolf pack filed past. They howled and it terrified her. the wolves became interested in something in the snow on the side of the road. She wrote that the dead had probably saved her life that night. Similar wolf attacks occurred in the same region during and shortly after World War II. Russian villages in the town of Krykov were attacked by wolves while tending to livestock. 22 children and teenagers were killed. These attacks and deaths are well documented, so I consider the wolf attacks and truce very plausible. And to show you what the size of a Russian wolf, it's a little bigger than Stubby. April 19th, 1942, U.S. Coast Guard at Dionne rendezvoused with the largest Buck Brigade convoy formed so far in World War II on Cape Lookout Shoals, North Carolina. Bucket brigades traveled from safe harbor to safe harbor in the daylight as a way of slowing down the devastation caused by U-boat attacks. Seaman First Class John Fleming was in his bunk exhausted after his watch. He was about to drop off to sleep when he felt a presence enter his cabin. It climbed on his bunk and sat on his chest. Gasping for breath and in a panic, he reached into his sea chest for his neglected rosary beads. John started praying, and gradually the weight on his chest lifted. When it's time to return to the watch, he was still feeling haunted by the unknown specter. Just as he got to his station on the flying bridge, he saw a torpedo coming directly at the Dionne. He stood transfixed as if in a trance, looking at the angel of death. Well, perhaps his prayers summoned his guardian angel as a Navy plane roared overhead, wagging its wings. The other crewmen, including the skipper, followed the craft's path and picked up the wake of the torpedo. Lieutenant Algers ordered a full speed and hard right rudder. The torpedo missed the Dionne by 20 yards. The tanker astern of the Dionne saw the evasive maneuver of the cutter and was able to dodge the torpedo fired at the Dionne. The tanker could not evade the second torpedo fired by Captain Lieutenant Zimmerman from U-136 and hit the bow of the ships. The tanker, Estel Donio, reported she was damaged but could still make headway. Luckily for her crew, the crude oil did not ignite. The leaking tanker made it safely to port. The Navy planes chased and harassed U-136, but she made it out safely into deeper water. In 2017, I went to Ligny, France, to attend my brother Christopher's wedding to the lovely Josette Morel. I slept in the attic room of her parents, Jean and Monique Moll's house. One night I woke up to find I could not move or even open my eyes. I felt as if something was sitting on my chest. It was not hard to breathe, but I felt paralyzed. Somehow I knew it was a German soldier demon. The image in my mind's eye was of a World War I German, not wearing the famous coal shuttle hat, but with a red band like this gentleman. My heart was racing, my breathing rapid. In my mind, I started saying the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and the 23rd Psalm repeatedly. This seemed to really bother the demon. If anything, I felt like praying made its anger increase. And then suddenly it was gone. I was able to open my eyes, looked around the room. I was wide awake, but alone in the moonlit room. The next was not occupied by the Germans in World War I, but the front lines were only a mile away. Biology professor and best-selling author Eugene Sledge, who wrote one of the finest memoirs of World War II, With the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, encountered a war demon. Now, his demon was a little bit different. His war demon appeared to be an alluring woman, promising the young Virgin Marine carnal pleasure if he went up to a hill where the Japanese infantry were waiting to kill him. He resisted the temptation and was able to write his book. Karl Marlantes is also a Marine. He was a second lieutenant in Vietnam. He returned home after a year of heavy combat. He earned the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts. In his memoir, What It's Like to Go to War, he recounted how he suffered from PTSD. A good friend and Catholic priest suggested a way out for Marlantes. He asked him to attend a private church ceremony with him. Marlantes would seek forgiveness by apologizing aloud to the people whose lives he had taken in Vietnam and the friends who he had lost. The priest called it a Mass of the Dead. In one of the most striking passages of the memoir, Marlantes describes what happened. The Mass took place at 2 a.m. in an old mission church in California. Candles illuminated the sanctuary, wine and bread rested on the altar. Marlantes and the priest were the only ones there. "Welcome, friends of Carl. Welcome, former enemies. We welcome you. Come in," the priest said as he opened the huge oak doors of the church. As the Mass unfolded, Marlantes said he actually felt the spirits from Vietnam enter the church. He could see enemies he had killed and the friends who had died under his command. He then saw them file into the pews across from one another. Even his late grandparents appeared, smiling at him as if to approve. He apologized aloud to all those he harmed, and then something else happened. His friends and enemies crossed the aisle, shook hands, and hugged one another. The priest ended the Mass with "Go in peace to love and serve the Lord." Marlantes felt like a stone had been rolled away from the entrance to his heart. It had been 30 years since he had fought in Vietnam, and he finally felt at peace. Enough about demons. How about some good old zombies? August 6, 1915, Ozlik Fortress in what is now northern Poland, but at that time it wasn't Poland. It was part of the Russian Empire. The German and Austrian army had laid siege to the fort. They bombarded it with conventional artillery, but when the wind was blowing in the correct direction, they released their new Wunderwaffen, poison gas. It's a combination of chlorine and bromide and will turn to acid when it enters the lungs. Thousands of Germans from the 11th Landswehr Division advanced on the fort, wearing gas masks. They expected to find nothing but piles of dead Russians. This was early in the use of poison gas in the war, and the Russians had not much more than urine-soaked rags to protect themselves. In the outer defenses, all was going to plan. No living soldiers were there to oppose the Hun advance. Sergei Komanov, a survivor, said of the gas attack, "Any living person near the bridgehead was dead. As this yellow gas cloud drifted towards him, he saw grass turn black and flowers wilt." Inside Fort Auschwitz, 3 companies of the 226th Infantry Division lay dead. But there were 100 men of the 4th Company still alive, barely. Lieutenant Vladimir Kolinsky was leader of the Company of the Undead. The 100 living men, living dead, opened fire on the stunned Germans. Their faces were wrapped up in bloody rags, exposed skin spilling. They were coughing up pieces of their acid-burdened lungs, staining the uniforms with blood. They were a sight that only a nightmare could produce. Vladimir ordered a bayonet charge. The fury the Russians felt toward their poisoners knew no bounds. Machine gun fire and shrapnel did not deter them. The terrified, much larger German force panicked. In their headlong retreat, the Huns became trapped in their own barbed wire. Surviving German artillerymen opened fire on the retreating foe. The zombie victory was short-lived, as the fort was abandoned later in the war as part of the strategic retreat. And of course, all the men shortly died after they drove the Germans out. Vietnam, by 1969, was a very bad place to be an officer. Nixon and the Pentagon knew the war could not be won militarily. The idea was to delay the North Vietnamese till the South could fight for itself and the U.S. could leave without losing face. If a war is not worth winning, then it's not worth dying for. Most of the infantry were now draftees that did not want to be there and did not want to be the last soldier killed on the way out. Between 1969 and 1972, there were 788 fraggings of U.S. officers with 86 deaths. Fragging is when you toss a fragmentation grenade into your target's hooch. Colin Powell slept in a different cot every night to avoid being fragged when he was an officer in the Marechal Division. Especially gung-ho soldiers bent on getting body count numbers were the usual targets. Colonel E.P. Howard, Jr. was the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 196th Light Infantry Brigade of the Marechal Division. He was a career military officer obsessed with body counts. He made troops dig up North Vietnamese graves and was mad if prisoners were brought in for questioning rather than being shot and added to the body count. He would helicopter troops into areas suspected to be loaded with enemy to ensure contact. Sergeant Borelli of the Alpha Company said he was the most miserable son of a bitch he had ever met. His troops decided he had to go. It was said Alpha Company soldiers paid a Kit Carson scout to dress like a VC and shoot Colonel Howard as Howard stepped off the helicopter. The assassin opened fire with his AK-47. He riddled the chopper with bullets, but somehow missed the colonel. Howard ordered the chopper back into the air. He knew his men had tried to kill him. He cursed them and swore they would have his revenge. Alpha Company was then choppered into the Song Chai Valley between 2 NVA regiments as a payback mission. They had 5 days of heavy fighting and many casualties before being extracted. On August 19, 1969, Colonel Howard's helicopter crashed and was shot down and crashed, and he was killed. When news reached Alpha Company, they cheered. The cheering was short-lived, as they were ordered to saddle up and go out and retrieve Colonel Howard's body. They had 8 killed, 50 wounded, or down with heat stroke in Taking Hill 102, which is where Howard was shot down. The colonel's curse had come true from beyond the grave. Eric Hanley was an early member of Delta Force and the author of the book Inside Delta Force. In his memoir, he states that in 1980, Delta Force received a mission to rescue 135 POWs, American POWs held in Laos. Vietnam had sent the prisoners to Laos to use as bargaining chips to get reparations from the U.S. for the damage done during the Vietnam War. They had done the same thing to the French at the end of the First Indochina War. Having the POWs in Laos gave them plausible deniability, as they could truthfully say there were no American POWs in Vietnam. Delta trained for the mission, built a mock POW camp, coordinated with Air Force helicopter pilots on the mission. Hanley was glad to have Air Force pilots, as the Navy helicopter pilots used in Operation Eagle Claw to rescue the Iranian hostages a few years earlier performed poorly. Just as they were getting ready to leave, Bo Gritz, former Green Beret officer in Vietnam, goes on national television to say he and a hodgepodge collection of veterans and survivalists are on a mission to rescue American POWs. This publicity stunt put the real rescue mission on hold. 1 year later, Delta again begins training for the rescue mission. They are literally ready to board their planes when Bo Gritz appears on television from Thailand saying he and his compatriots are going to Laos to rescue the POWs. The mission is scrubbed for good. 2 U.S. Air Force pilots that were part of the mission took the unusual step of suing the government to get information about the mission released, but a judge sympathetic to the government shut the case down. Haney speculates that the CIA used Gritz's huge ego to make him an unwilling sabotage for the real rescue missions. After the second attempt, the Vietnamese and the Laotian government, instead of moving the prisoners, killed all the POWs and destroyed all evidence of them. January 11th, 1944, Sergeant James Radley was a tail gunner on this end of Skippy, a B-17 bomber of the 301st Bomb Group, 353rd Bomb Squadron, stationed in Italy. They ran into heavy cloud cover in the mission to Greece. Unfortunately, there was a collision between planes. The entire tail section of Skippy was torn off. The tail section spun around and around like a flittering leaf. Riley could see glimpses of blue and green and brown flash past his window. He was pinned by centrifugal force and couldn't move. He thought as he fell, in a few minutes he would be dead. Instead, the aerodynamics of the tail section allowed it to flitter like a leaf, and it crashed into some trees that cushioned the blow. He survived falling and was totally unhurt. He was taken prisoner and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of the Germans. After the war, he visited the families of the men killed in the crash. He and Lorraine Sudol, the co-pilot's widow, would fall in love, and Lorraine would become James' bride. Perhaps the hand of God saved James' life, but he can't be sure. Could just be coincidence. Captain Arnold Brown of the 90th Infantry Division knows what the hand of God feels like. In November 1944, the 90th Infantry Division had crossed the Saar River in assault boats and had taken half the city of Dillingen when he went looking for a good observation point to set up an artillery fort observer. He went to the second floor of a likely site. It was so good an observation point as there already were 2 infantrymen using it. At that moment, as if you were watching TV or drone footage, neither of which existed at the time, he saw, his vision went out from the OP, he saw a German soldier in his distinctive steel helmet talking to a field telephone. His vision followed the wire to a German artillery command center. There he saw other Germans talking to a gun crew. The crew were loading the cannon and adjusting its aim. He hesitated. Should he tell the soldiers of his vision? If they left and nothing happened, they would think he was crazy and not obey his orders. Arnold then felt an invisible force push him. That was enough for him. He left the position, and as he sped out of the building and onto the street, an enemy shell hit the position, killing the 2 soldiers instantly. He swears it was the hand of God saving his life. He spent the rest of the war convinced he was going to survive because of God or a guardian angel, which of course he did. England, 1939, the National Air Raid Precaution Animals Committee was worried that another U-boat embargo would cause food shortages and recommended that pets that could not be sent to the countryside should be euthanized. They promoted a captive bolt pistol for this purpose. The committee's fear was owners would share their shared rations with the pets or leave the animals to starve. There were an estimated 750,000 pets killed, especially in September 1940, after the first time London was bombed. Many of the pet owners, after getting over the terror of the German bombing campaign, regretted their decision and blamed the government for starting hysteria. Like the government could ever start a hysteria over stuff. One dog that survived London's pet holocaust, as it's called, was a mutt named Rip. Rip's owner and home did not survive the Blitz. The mongrel terrier was homeless and ownerless after Luftwaffe bombed and destroyed his East London home. He somehow managed to survive on the streets. One day he came across Air Raid Warden Mr. E. King. King threw the dog a tidbit, hoping to send him on his way, which is not a good way to get rid of a dog. That gesture led to a partnership between Mr. King and Rip. He became Air Warden's mascot and sniffer dog. Mr. King said it was not a matter of training Rip. You couldn't stop him. He would follow Mr. King on his rounds. The first sign that there was somebody in the rubble was a twitch of Rip's nose. He would then scamper over a pile of debris that was someone's home. He would dig feverishly when he found someone, ignoring the bombs, sirens, and fires and smoke. In 12 months, from 1940 to 41, Rip is credited with locating 100 people. As Mr. King became better at reading Rip's behavior, he could determine if Rip had found a living victim or if the person was dead. He could then direct rescuers accordingly. Rip's natural innate ability to locate people in rubble led to other dogs being trained in search and rescue. He became a national hero and was awarded the Dickens Medal for gallantry. I think you've all had enough of scary stuff for a while. Let's talk about babies. There's nothing scary about babies, is there? Well, when Hitler and Himmler are involved, they can be. The Font of Life, or Lebensborn program, was started in 1935 to promote the growth of Germans' Aryan populations. Originally, SS men were encouraged to have large families, and unmarried Aryan women were discouraged from having illegal abortions. Lebensborn homes were set up in secluded areas to support and offer prenatal care to pregnant Aryan women. Himmler decreed that SS men and their fiancées had to pass a purity test before being allowed to marry. When the war started, Lebensborn homes were started in occupied territories. They often took over Jewish nursing homes and turned them into Nazi birthing centers. Non-German women of Aryan descent were impregnated by SS officers and sent to these homes. The SS repatriated thousands of Aryan-looking children by kidnapping them and sending them to Germany. German couples adopted these children, believing them to be war orphans. 20,000 babies were born in the 9-year run of the Lebensborn program, but there were many more kidnapped children. All records of the program were destroyed, so the total number of children is unknown. The loss of the records made it very difficult to return the children. Children born to Danish women had it the worst. After the war, they were harassed, ridiculed, beaten, and raped for the sins of their fathers. Recently, the Danish government issued an apology for the Lebensborn for the abuse they suffered. Enough about human scariness. Let's go to the woods. What could be scary in there? Well, we all know, right? Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, all right. Well, we'll start off with lions. This is a picture of the American Escadrille, a group of volunteer pilots that joined the Allied cause before America entered World War I. They had 2 lion cubs, one named Whiskey and one named Soda, as mascots. Whiskey is being held by Gerard Raoul Lufberry. He became an ace before America entered the war. He then commanded the 94th Pursuit Squadron, and he was a mentor to American ace of aces, Eddie Rickenbacker. Wrestling with a lion may seem to be a dangerous hobby, but in air combat, the life expectancy of a pilot in World War I was 15 minutes. You were safer wrestling with a lion than doing your job. Now for the really bizarre part. American generals were old school, super macho lot. None of them had flown an airplane before. They decided American pilots would not be allowed to wear parachutes, lest the man jump out of his plane at the first sign of danger. The planes were constructed out of wood. The gasoline tank was near the front of the plane, near the engine. The frame was covered with cloth treated with flammable dope. German pilots were allowed to use parachutes. Both sides used incendiary bullets to light the planes on fire. When Lufberry's plane was set aflame by incendiary bullets, he had 2 choices: burn to death or jump to his death. He jumped. He landed near the Yankee Division area, and they had an elaborate funeral for him. Tiger encounters in Vietnam were rare, but they did happen. The most well-documented one involves a recon team from Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marine Division. On December 22nd, 1968, the six-man team was out on an observation patrol near Fire Support Base Alpine in the Quai Trang province. The mission completed, they were ready for helicopter evacuation. Bad weather forced a delay in their pickup. The troops bedded down for the night. Two on radio watch, the rest sleeping. PFC Roy Regan was awakened by the screams of Sergeant Goulden. A tiger had attacked suddenly and silently. Sergeant Goulden was in the big cat's mouth. Regan instinctively jumped at the tiger. The cat leapt away, carrying the struggling sergeant. It went into a nearby bomb crater. The rest of the team, now awake, followed it and fired at it, killing the predator. Sergeant Goulden stumbled out of the crater in a daze and asked what the hell had happened. First aid, a medevac helicopter was called for. Shortly thereafter, the Marine Chinook helicopter carried the wounded Sergeant Goulden and the rest of the recon team and the dead tiger back to 3rd Battalion's medical hospital. Goulden was treated for bites and lacerations on his neck. The recon team and the tiger went to division headquarters, where Division Commander Major General James G. Davis examined the huge beast and congratulated the team for killing the animal. The tiger was 9 feet long and weighed over 500 pounds. On November 12, 1968, less than 10 miles from the site of the attack, a Marine had been killed by a tiger, probably the same one. In the spring of 1942, there was a newly formed Andre's army made up of Polish POWs that were captured in the Soviet Union's attack on 1939. Everybody remembers the Germans going into Poland. They forget the Russians came in on the other side. They were evacuated to join the British Army in an agreement between the Russians, the Poles, and the English. The Army left the Soviet Union for Iran, accompanied by thousands of Polish civilians who had been deported to the Soviet Union following the Soviet invasion of eastern Poland. They were in Siberia. At a railroad station in Hamadan, Iran, on April 8, 1942, Polish soldiers encountered a young Iranian boy who had a Syrian cub whose mother had been shot by hunters. One of the civilian refugees in their midst, an 18-year-old Irina Boykovitz, was taken by the cub. She prompted Lieutenant Anatol Taranowski to acquire the young bear by trading the boy for some chocolate and a large can of bully beef. The unnamed cub spent the next 3 months in a Polish refugee camp established near Tehran, principally under Irina's care. A refugee camp is no place for an inquisitive, troublesome bear. In August 1942, the bear was donated to the 2nd Transport Company, which later became the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, to be their mascot. He was named Wojtek by the soldiers. Wojtek is the diminutive form of Wojciech, which means happy warrior in Polish. Wojtek originally had problems swallowing and was fed condensed milk from an old vodka bottle. Soon after the soldiers acquired him, Lance Corporal Piotr Prendes was officially named Wojciech's caregiver. Being 45 years old, he was older and more mature than most of the other soldiers. He had lost his wife and 2 sons at the very beginning of the war when they were sent to Siberia. He never talked about his family, but judging by his age, he had a few years' experience bringing up children. He probably saw Wojciech as a replacement for them and treated him accordingly. Piotr was the one who came up with the idea of feeding Wojciech the diluted condensed milk in a vodka bottle. Piotr became like a mother to the cub. Cubs learn from their mothers as bears do in the wild. The two became very attached to each other. Piotr often carried him around like a baby, only the curious cub's head popping out from under his greatcoat in cold evenings. He was subsequently given fruit, marmalade, honey, and syrup. He was often rewarded with beer, which became one of his favorite drink. He later enjoyed smoking or actually eating lit cigarettes. He wouldn't eat them if they weren't lit. He drank beer as well as coffee. He enjoyed wrestling with the soldiers. He also slept with them if they were cold at night. He was taught how to salute. He became an attraction for soldiers and civilians alike and soon became the unofficial mascot to all the units stationed nearby. With the 22nd Company, he moved to Iraq and then through Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. While stationed in Palestine, his company, being a military transportation unit, ferried supplies to various places all over the Middle East. Although Wojciech's boredom threshold was very low, he was exemplary when traveling. Sitting in the cab of a speeding truck had a calming effect on him. He would stick his head out through the open window and go into reverie. Even after the engine stopped, he liked to carry on sitting there. This was perfect, an easy, convenient way to entertain him and keep him out of mischief. And it was also useful on occasions when the soldiers had to leave the truck to attend to other duties. Due to notorious shortages of goods, petty theft was rife in the Middle East, but nothing was ever stolen from a truck when Wojciech was guarding it. Wojciech copied the soldiers drinking beer and smoke and even marching alongside of them in his hind legs because he saw them do so. From Egypt, the 2nd Polish Corps was reassigned to fight along the British 8th Army in the Italian campaign. Regulations for British transport ships, which were to carry them to Italy, forbade a mascot and pet animals. To get around this restriction, Wojciech was officially drafted into the Polish army. He was a private, enlisted among the soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Henry Zakharowicz and Dmitry Szawługło were assigned, it's Szawługło, so you can say it any way you want, were assigned to be his caretakers. He was kept cool by being doused with water on the very hot voyage to Italy. Wojciech's love of water was a problem as he learned how to turn on taps and would waste the scarce commodity. He would hang around the showers, but that always kept him locked out. An Arab spy that was mapping out the camp for an upcoming raid hid in the shower tent, but failed to lock the door. In burst Wojciech. The spy's screams brought the guards. The guards threatened the frightened spy with a large, fierce-looking bear, and he confessed the whole plot. They then let the bear enjoy a very long shower, causing them to have to order another tanker truck of water. Wojciech made himself most useful in the most famous battle. Is most famous for when he helped unload and carry ammunition boxes in the heat of the Battle of Monte Cassino. Wojciech simply liked to do what other soldiers were doing. He already was used to lifting and carrying. During times when the soldiers couldn't take turns keeping an eye on him, he was tethered to a long chain attached to a stake and hammered into the ground. Wojciech soon learned that he could pull the stake out of the ground and carry it around with him. He can go wherever he wanted to and got to explore that way. Being burdened with the wooden stake and walking his hind legs slowed him down a bit, but also got him used to carrying things. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, he was observing the soldiers unloading the 100-pound boxes of 25-pounder ammunition shells. After a while, he went over to a truck with his paws outstretched and did what the others do, at least for a while. He then got bored, climbed a tree, then came down again and helped a bit more. He worked alongside his companions day after day for 3 weeks, on flexible hours with arbitrary breaks and plenty of snacks for encouragement, which was much more relaxed schedule than most of the men were on. He never dropped a single ammo box. His actions were also witnessed and documented by British soldiers as well as in Polish records. The Poles were so proud of him that they signed a new insignia for the company with Wojciech in it. He symbolically represented carrying a shell rather than a crate. When the war in Europe ended, the 2nd Polish Corps was sent to Scotland for demobilization. The new communist governor of Poland wanted Wojciech sent there, but his comrade Nans instead gave him to the Edinburgh Zoo. There, he happily spent the rest of his life being visited by his war buddies and their children. He would perk up whenever he heard anyone speaking Polish. He died in 1963. 42 to 63. Not bad. Not to brag, but Camp Edwards had 2 bears, mascots. The first was Stinky McGee. The name Stinky McGee sounds familiar to me, and I can't picture where I'd heard it before. If anybody knows or recognizes Stinky McGee, probably from a radio program in the 30s, maybe one of Charlie McCarthy's dummies or something, a.k.a. Meanie, he was a gift from the great state of Maine. His mother was killed after she broke into a fisherman's cabin and killed a prize dog by the Penobscot River. His father was wanted for numerous crimes, robbery, sheep killing, and general bad behavior. McNeil Brown, the superintendent of the Island Fisheries and Dry Mills Game Farm, when asked for a bear cub mascot, advised the Army to wait until bear cub season for a younger bear, as all he had on hand was Stinky, a year-old, 175-pound bundle of black dynamite. The anti-tank battery G of the 180th Field Artillery said they wanted the meanest, toughest critter there was to act as their mascot. They said to send Stinky down south. Brown was delighted with Battery G's request, as he was contemplating on doing away with Stinky. He was getting too hard to handle. He insisted that the state of Maine would not be held liable for the antics or injuries of the bear. Battery G had to build a special cage to hold him. On March 14, 1940, Stinky arrived and received a grand welcome, including a parade, a band, a 6-gun salute. Stinky's caretaker was to be Sam J. Pollock of Brighton. He used to see bears in the orchards when he worked in New Hampshire near Stinson Lake. Pollock will have to gain his knowledge of bear keeping the hard way. It should come as no surprise that Stinky McGee did not work out as a mascot and was mustered out of the Army, honorably but definitely. He was sent to the Franklin Park Zoo. He lived up to his nickname, Meanie, and he injured several soldiers and was just too much of a bother. As tough as he was, Stinky did not impress zoo curator Dan Harkins. Dan took one look at him and put him in a monkey cage. He wasn't this big then. He was too young and too mild a fellow for the bear cage. Some of the rest of the real tough ones might kill him if they got a hold of him. The last we heard about Stinky was in early 1945 in a reply in a newspaper to an inquiry from a mother of a Yankee Division soldier whose son had asked about the bear. Curator Harkins said Stinky is big, well, and in good temper. The second bear cub mascot was Snuffy. The 208th Coastal Artillery Anti-Aircraft Battalion got a young bear cub from the animal farm in New Hampshire. You know how you can go up and just pick up bear cubs? They didn't have laws the same way back then. From an animal farm in New Hampshire. The caption notes the arrival of Corporal Snuffy, but alludes to other mascots, including a baboon. Snuffy was younger and by all accounts a much more pleasant bear. He bonded with the soldiers and did not need a special cage. Here he is, a 4-month-old cub going for a ride in Uncle Sam's new vehicle, originally called a Blitz buggy or a Beep. This is an early Bantam Jeep. It was later in the war when the vehicle picked up the nickname Jeep. Anybody know where the word name Jeep came from? Oh, you people believe propaganda. Jeep. This was a magical character in a Popeye cartoon that could go anywhere. And that's when the Peep became the Jeep. Eugene the Jeep. Snuffy was beloved by the soldiers and well taken care of. His minors were Sergeant Charles Cadam and Vito Pastoroni of West Hartford. Snuffy's quarters or supply room in Battery C of the 208th Coastal Artillery Battalion. Snuffy was nice, but he was a little mischievous. He would smear honey all over the floor and liked to prank soldiers that came into the supply room by slamming the door behind them when they entered a closet and leaning up against the door to hold them there. Snuffy's most famous escapade happened when he was home in West Hartford with his keepers, Sergeant Cadam and Prasterini. They took him home on weekends as the sergeants did not want to entrust the key to the supply room to anyone else. He stayed chained in Cadam's garage during the weekends at home. Somehow Snuffy unlatched his chain and made a break for it when Childs opened the garage door. The cub shimmied up a tree behind the garage. Unable to coax him down, the sergeant had to call for the fire department. A 45-foot ladder was set up against the tree. Sergeant Vito Parisi climbed the ladder and got hold of Snuffy. He came down to about 35 feet and dropped Snuffy into a waiting blanket held by Charles and the firemen. He let out a wail as he plummeted in the blanket, was captured and returned to the garage where he ate bread and honey as if nothing happened. Here he's doing the walk of shame back to the garage. With the arrival of winter, it was decided in early December of 1941 that Snuffy should spend his hibernation in the Forest Park Zoo in Springfield, Mass., till he could resume his duties in April. This article appeared on December 7th, 1941. Well, everything changed at that point. The 208th was rushed to the Pacific Theater of Operations to combat Japanese air power, and Snuffy was left at the Springfield Zoo, the Forest Park Zoo in Springfield. And here the trail goes cold. The Forest Park Zoo went from private to public ownership in the 1960s, and they have no record. So the trail went cold. And this also concludes our Eerie tale. Let me take a picture of you all so I can put it in my newsletter. There was a sheet going around for newsletters. Any questions, comments on the subject matter? No? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Hope you learned something.